Hello, Algebra 1 Advanced students. This is your first day of notes, so you should be sitting in a quiet workspace. Carve out some time, make sure you are committed to sitting here, taking some notes, working through a quick worksheet, and this will be, like I said, our first day of real math material. So just kind of get yourselves ready, mentally focused. Here we go. This is the properties. So typically when we're in person, I have these all in a packet for the students. I didn't think that was necessarily the best idea since you guys are all at home. So I am just gonna quickly just box in some things that I think that you should write down so that you can refer back to them. If there's anything you miss, or if you don't quite have a notebook yet, this video will be online. So if you get to your homework and you get stuck and you just missed something or didn't have the opportunity to write it down, this video will be available. So I would recommend you start out your notes with this word, the properties. So we are learning the algebraic properties. We're going to review them today. I'm hoping you've heard of these before, but it's basically a lot of just memorizing what the things look like. That's why I think writing it down will be helpful. But again, if you don't quite catch it all, or if you don't get it all down in the notebook exactly, just open this video back up when you're doing your homework and go back to the parts that you need. So here is the first property we're going to talk about, the commutative property. So the commutative property always reminds me of commuting. So if I'm commuting to work, let's say, that is me driving back and forth to work. So I live in Columbia, I work in Belleville, so my commute starts in Columbia, ends in Belleville every morning. And at the end of the day, it starts in Belleville and ends in Columbia. It's the same exact road, it's the same exact distance, but the order is backwards. That is what the commutative property means. So you should write this down, commutative property, and then just jot down these examples. Okay, so the commutative property just means that it's the same solution if you write it backwards. So A plus B is the same thing as B plus A. And actually we have some examples that pop up here. So again, let me highlight what you should write down one more time. Commutative property, here's an example with letters. If you prefer to write it down in numbers, that's fine too. Obviously, when you're adding, it's called the commutative property of addition, or when you're multiplying, it's commutative property of multiplication. So if you want to write these words down too, that's fine. Typically, if you see a plus sign, addition, you guys are pretty good with that sort of thing. But the important thing to remember is that order does not matter. The solution is the same, the value is the same, the order is just flip-flopped, okay? So if you didn't have enough time to write down the things that you thought were important or the things that I told you were important, pause the video, jot those down in your notebook, and then continue on. So here's our next property, the associative property. The associative property has to do with parentheses moving. So if you hear someone say like your business associates, that's who you work with, who you're grouped with at work. So the associative property is all about grouping. If the grouping changes, you are using the associative property. Okay, so once again, if you see a plus sign, it's the associative property of addition. If you see a multiplication symbol, or we use grouping symbols to represent multiplication, it's of multiplication. I would not necessarily bother with writing these down. I would just pick your favorite example from over here. If you want to use the letters, if you want to use the numbers, that's fine. I would do at least one with an addition and at least one with a multiplication, just so you know that it does work for both of these, okay? And I should have said with the commutative property and with the associative property, they do not work with subtraction or division. So these are just strictly addition and multiplication. So again, if you have not had enough time to write those down, pause the video. I should have said this already. I don't grade the notes. So if you already know this or you don't think it's important or you plan on just doing your homework while you're watching the video, I will never know. That sounds bad to admit, but write down what's helpful to you. I don't want you to get bogged down in busy work if you don't think writing it down is helpful. You can watch, you can soak it all in, and you can give the homework a shot. And if you get stuck, watch the video again. All right, here are some of the properties of equality. So these you do need to write down. Whoops. So go ahead and write these three properties down. reflexive, symmetric, and transitive. And the broad heading here is properties of equality. So the properties of equality, you will see these a lot when you do geometry next year. So we're just going to briefly touch them in algebra, and then you'll use them more when you advance in your math careers, like I said. So the reflexive property, it's sort of like looking in a mirror. It's the same thing on both sides of the equal sign, okay? So 5 equals 5, 2 plus 4 equals 2 plus 4. The order doesn't change, nothing changes. It's the exact same thing on both sides of the equal sign. That is the reflexive property. And that has an X. A lot of people want to spell that one wrong, but it's reflexive with an X. The next one is the symmetric property. The symmetric property, it's similar to the commutative property in that the order changes, but the order changes over an equal sign. So A equals B, B also equals A. So this is an if-then statement. You'll see those a lot in geometry too. So if the first thing equals the second thing, you can flip the order. The second thing equals the first thing. So you can switch the order of what's in front of the equal sign, what's behind the equal sign. They're equivalent, okay? That is the symmetric property. The transitive property, this is where you cut out the middleman. So if A equals B and B equals C, then A and C must be equal to one another. It makes a little bit more sense when we actually plug some stuff in. So if A equals 3 and 3 equals C, do you see how A and C have the same value? So that's the transitive property. I have a little memory trick that I like to use on these. If you think about the alphabet, right? R, S, T, that's the order they appear in the alphabet, right? And then 1, 2, 3. The reflexive property, it's the exact same thing. You have one thing equal to itself, or here it's two things, but think of it as one unit equal to itself. Nothing is changing. You have one thing you're focused on. One thing equals the exact same thing, okay? Symmetric property, this would be second if I put them in alphabetical order. You have two items, A and B, B and A. They're the same two items, you just flip-flop the order. And again, if I was going to put these in alphabetical order, the third property in alphabetical order would be transitive property. This piece has three parts, okay? We have an A, B, and a C. We have an A, a 3, and a C. So there's three different items, third in alphabetical order. So that might help you keep the property straight. Just like I said, a quick memory trick that I use. Some people don't find it as helpful. But again, just figure out what works for you, and hopefully we can go from there. So if this was my set of notes, I would list these three properties and either write down the letters or the ones with the numbers. Just, again, jot something down quickly in your notebook that while you're doing your homework, after this, you can just refer back to these properties. I should probably say this as well. I will also attach this presentation, the actual slides, to your Google Classroom. So if you have access to a printer, if you just want to print them out and follow along, that would be fine too. Again, whatever works for you guys, you are really going to have to figure out a little bit of independence as we go through this whole remote learning process. How in-depth do your notes need to be? What exactly are you going to do to get yourself to the place where you're successfully completing your homework? These are things you're going to have to find out. And if you want to talk one-on-one about, ways I stay organized and ways I do notes, we can definitely do that. But like I said, for right now, just write down what you think would be helpful. Okay, here's our next property. This is the substitution property. It says that you can substitute a value in and your equation is still true. Okay, so over here is an example. It says if, and we have 5, and then parentheses 3 plus 6. Okay, they're telling that equals some quantity 7m. Well, I am going to take the 3 plus 6 out, and I'm going to substitute in an equivalent value. We all know that 3 plus 6 is 9. I took it out, I substituted in an equivalent value. It still equals whatever this 7m is. Okay, so that's the substitution property. You're putting an equal amount into an equation or an expression. I would write substitution property, and I would just copy this down. Just a quick example to show you exactly what the substitution property is. Again, if you need to pause the video to catch up, you can. All right, here is the identity property. So the identity property, I always remember the identity property because your identity is who you are. And the identity property, who that number is not changing. So if we're looking at addition, in order for our number not to change using addition, the magical number is to add 0. So if I have 3 plus 0, it still equals 3. The identity of the 3 has not changed. Now, that rule is different when we're looking at multiplication because we can't multiply by 0. That would change the identity of the number. So the magic identity number when you're multiplying is to multiply by 1. Okay, so here's your quick example to jot down in your notes. 3 times 1 is 3. The identity of the 3 has not changed. All right, the inverse property. So the inverse property, inverse undoes something. So when in math, if we use the inverse, we want to undo the operation. So to undo addition, you add the opposite. So if I want to undo an A, I would add a negative A. If I want to undo a 5, I would add a negative 5. So when I add opposite numbers, I end up with 0. That's what the inverse property says. Okay, to undo using multiplication, it's a little bit different. So you can go ahead and write inverse property of multiplication in your notes. To undo something using multiplication, you actually multiply by the reciprocal. So you flip the number. So if I have an A and I multiply it by a 1 over A, I end up with 1. Same thing with the 5. If you want to undo a 5, you would multiply it by 1/5. That's the identity property. Oh, nope, that's the inverse property. Okay, so in your notes, go ahead and write down inverse property. Addition, we add opposites. Multiplication, we multiply inverses. All right, one of my favorite words in math class is the multiplicative property of 0. So the multiplicative property of 0 says if you multiply any number by 0, you get 0. Okay, so I should say if you multiply any real number by 0, you get 0. That's a pretty standard one. But again, if you are writing all of these down, I would write this guy. Give yourself a quick example. And then here is the distributive property. Students usually do pretty well with this one. It says that if you are multiplying by a sum, so you're multiplying a number by a sum, you can multiply each piece by that number. So a lot of times you'll see this. Same thing over here. We would multiply the 3 times the A, keep the plus sign, multiply the 3 times the 5, and you get 15. So we will do a lot with the distributive property when we do order of operations next week. But for now, just write quick example. I would probably just write this guy in the notes, distributive property. Okay. Let me make sure I have the right slide up here. All right, so we are going to identify the property. So this is what your homework's going to look like. So that's why I think it's helpful to have some notes jotted down, like I said, just really quickly so you can see examples of the property as you're trying to sort through them. But if not, you have access to the presentation through a video. You have access to the slides as well. So if you need to go back and go through those, that is fine. So here is what you'll see on your homework. You will be given an example and you have to identify the property. Okay, so in this example, x equals 2 and 2 equals z, then x equals z. That is the transitive property. We have 3 items, we're cutting out the middleman. Transitive property. All right, next example. So we have negative 3 plus 4 in parentheses, plus 5, and then the grouping changes over here. So instead of adding these 2 first, I would be adding these 2 first. So when you are changing the grouping, that's an example of the associative property. Now on your homework, you have to say if it's addition or multiplication. So if you see addition signs, or plus signs, it's the property of addition. Multiplication signs, it's the property of multiplication. All right, this is actually the one we just talked about. So we have multiplication, we have a sum or difference in parentheses. You can multiply each of those pieces by that number out front. This is called the distributive property. So your answer would be distributive property. Okay, my goal is to keep all of my videos under 15 minutes. I am currently at 15 and a half minutes, so I am gonna go ahead and wrap this up for today. I feel like I rambled a little, so be patient with me. I'm not used to teaching to an empty room and an iPad, so if I ever get off topic, just, bear with me. So this is the end of your notes. Some of you will have 2 pages of a notebook filled up because you are someone who loves writing stuff down. Some of you might not have written anything down. That's fine. I keep saying that. Find what works for you. I am not grading your notes. I am not collecting notes ever. Notes are for you to help you. So if writing all that stuff down is helpful, great. If printing out the presentation is helpful, great. If watching the video 3 times is helpful, great. You need to figure out your own personal strategy. And like I said, if you want to meet with me and talk about different strategies and maybe which one I think would work for one particular student, that would be great. This is a learning process for all of us. So see what works for you. This video is available for the rest of the school year. So if you missed something, or if you're like, oh, I wish I would have taken notes, but I didn't think I needed to, watch it again, take it again. Okay, so when you're comfortable with where you are with your notes, go ahead and find your worksheet for today. So it should be in your Google Classroom under classwork. It should be right below this video. It is a matching exercise. So the 2 options for this would be to print it out, write on that piece of paper, and then send it back to me, or you can just jot down the answers in a notebook. It's, like number 1 is W. There isn't a W option, but if you just want to do it that way and send me a picture of it, that's fine. Actually, I guess a 3rd option would be to open it in Google Classroom, and you can type right on, or not Google Classroom, Google Docs, and just type right on there what the matching answers are. That would be fine too. So however you want to do it, just submit it through that assignment. So attach your work, whether it's a doc or a picture, and submit that to me by 4 p.m. on Friday. Okay, now I'm pushing 18 minutes, so I am going to let you guys go. I hope you're doing well. If none of this makes sense, just send me an email, and we will do another lesson tomorrow and another worksheet tomorrow. So check back tomorrow, get your homework done, submit it to me, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks.